All right, we're back. We are COMP397 in the fall 2017 semester, and we are week 2, part 3 of our broadcast. And we want to finish off the button class. That's what we're doing. We're using object-oriented programming techniques in JavaScript, and the way we're doing that is with TypeScript. All right, TypeScript is JavaScript with some extra wheels. All right, it's JavaScript. It's syntactic sugar. Call it what you like to make JavaScript easier. All right, so we have this problem. The problem was that we're trying to measure the width of the object, but the object's never been loaded yet, so we're getting a problem. To fix this, we need to use a preloader. And inside my game.ts file, again, I have a start method, but maybe the start method should happen after I preload, right? So therefore, let's add another function in here, right? This is in my main game. I'm going to call this function, and again, you can call it preload or init or something. I'm just going to call it init. Okay? This init function, what it's going to do is preload, right? So now, if you notice down here, I'm using my onload. The window calls the start method, right? But this time, I'm going to change the onload method so it starts the init method. So I'm not starting my start method first. Why am I not doing that? Because I want to preload my images. I want to fetch my images first. And when it's done preloading my images, then I'm going to call my start method. To get the syntax for this, we're going to go to the web. And in my preload.js, there is some documentation. If you scroll down, you can see that I have something called a queue. I'm going to bring this a little closer so you can see. This is some of the code that we're going to use. Look, I have something. They're using something called a queue, and they're creating this calling it load queue. I'm going to call it the again assets. I'm going to call it the asset, right? It's going to be the asset class, right? We can call it asset manager, or you want to call it the something like that, but something where my queue isn't just a load queue. It's like a bunch of assets, okay? So I could call it the asset manager, and I recommend we call it asset manager like that. So asset manager dot and then load queue is what it's going to be, or asset manager dot install plugin, asset manager dot on complete. Then we're going to call the start method. That's what we're going to do. Okay, almost exactly the same. So I'm going to copy some of this stuff just up to here, right? Hold on before you do this, and let me show you what to do. All right. So inside of my init function, right, I'm going to copy this in. Now this is all good, but I'm going to rename some of this stuff. So instead of me doing it here, I'm going to create something up here. I'm going to make an object that I'm going to call, and the reason why I'm calling it up there is so that it's available within my entire game object, right? So I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say let asset manager, right, be of type CreateJS.loadQueue. That's what my asset manager is now, right? And I'm going to take this asset manager and copy it in here. So I'm just going to rename this. And I could have made a queue and rename automatically, but it's okay. So this is my asset manager. This is good. This is a good line. CreateJS sound. I can load sounds as well. This is what this says. This line here, line 11 that I got here, says, hey, my asset manager can now load sounds too, not just images. All right? Now, this, what was that? Oh yes, that's bad. I don't need the var anymore. And also, this one here is an event handler that says on complete, when I'm done loading, call what? I want to call my start method. Oh. There we go. I don't have to pass this in. This just basically says, I can pass a reference to the to this particular function. I don't have to do that, so I can take that away. Now, load file. I'm not going to use this method, this methodology. I don't like this methodology. This load file. I can load one file at a time that way, but that doesn't make any sense. In fact, I want to load a manifest, right? A manifest, and I'm going to call this another little object called let asset manifest, right? and we're going to define this in a second. I want this asset manifest to equal an array, right? And the array is going to be, we're going to decide the type in a second, of this type. I'm going to take this part right here and put it up here. Okay? My image is going to be called click button, or click me, yeah, click button. I call it click me button or click button. I can't remember. No, I want to see the asset. So I think I called it click me button. Okay, that's fine. So click me button. And the path to the button is exactly what we had put before. So it is / assets, assets, images, and then click me button.ping. There we go. So what does this do? Before we continue. Asset management is asset manifest now is an array of assets, but take a look what it does. It gives us this structure where we have an ID and a source. So it's an array of a particular structure. Not really descriptive enough for me. We won't touch it now, but what I'm going to do later is create another little structure, right, or class that defines the asset manifest as something. Right? Right now I don't need to do that. I know that I have two properties, ID and source, for each of the elements inside my array. Okay? Now I've got this. Here's my asset manifest. And what I'm going to do inside of here when I do my load manifest is I'm going to pass in a reference to my asset manifest here. Manifest. There we go. Okay, so this is the complete code so far. So what am I doing? I first define my assets. Right now I have my click me button. Then I instantiate an object of type asset manager, right? Which is of type load queue. Then I install the plugin so I can load sounds too. I create a event handler that tells me when I'm done loading, call the start method. And then I define my manager, my manifest. My manifest is going to be all the stuff that I define in this array. So I can define a lot of buttons and sounds and stuff in this array, and it won't call my start method until they're all loaded physically in memory. Okay, we need to make some changes now. There's two problems I now have, right? The asset manager object only exists inside my game object, and it's encapsulated inside of a closure. So there's a couple ways I can do this. Either I pass my asset manager into my class, right? Because it won't understand. It will never get this thing unless I pass it in, right? Or I make it a global function outside of my closure, which I really am loath to do. I don't like that. I'd rather keep it inside. And there's other options too, which I'm not going to go into right now to keep it easy. So what I mean by that is when I make my button, my button class, I need to, when I instantiate my object, my button object here, because it's an object that requires that, I'm not going to just pass in my image anymore, right? This click me button, right? This is what this object.button is. But I'm also going to pass a reference to my asset manager. I would like never to do that. And I'll tell you why. In reality, right, that means I got to pass a reference into another. It's like a dependency that I'm creating, right? And I don't want that. I would rather create another class called asset manager that is globally available to my classes as another object, right? So I create an object called asset manager. It has all my assets. It loads everything up first. And then after that, I have access to it because it's part of my class structure and I can call it. For now though, because that's a lot of work we don't have time for, let us just pass it in. So what I really want to do in my button class, go back to my button class to make this work and get it going. Here's my button class, button.ts. I'm going to take another parameter in my button class, and it's going to be called the asset manager, right? So I'm going to say asset manager, right? Which is going to be of type CreateJS.loadQueue. Okay? So I don't have this button in here. And just to add this in, notice the parameter is my first parameter. I'm going to say @param just to keep the coding good, which is going to be of type CreateJS.loadQueue. Right, that's the type. And it's going to be called Asset Manager. Right? Again, it's a hack right now. Please, I'm sorry, but we have to kind of work slowly. So this is my Asset Manager. I'm passing it into my button class, and I put it in here. I'm just making a documenting it right here. Great. Okay, fantastic. Right. Now, what I'm going to do, right, is I still pass in my path, right, in my game.ts file. I'll still do this, but I also pass a reference to my Asset Manager like this. Right? That passes my Asset Manager in. Right? Here's my path. Right? Here's my path, but this isn't good anymore because I've already defined where I'm getting it from. Right? I've already done that work up here. Right? Here. All I need is this now. Click Me button, because the ID of the button is called Click Me button, and my source, I already know what it is. Right? So down in here, all I need to do is pass in this part. And I'll show you the completed version in a second. I'm passing in that part, right? That's the string. That's my button string, right? That's my button identifier, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, right? And then I got to do one more different thing. In my button class, right? When in my constructor, this image path isn't the image path. It's the image name, right? So I'm just going to change this to the image name. So rename. So I'm going to rename here by going to rename symbol, right? Where I say instead of image path, it's going to be image name. That's going to rename everything inside of here, right? So I pass in the image name, but that's not enough. That's not what I want to do. I want to pass in Asset Manager. Oops, let's see if I do this in one fell swoop. Because my Asset Manager is my load queue, I can say get result. That's a method of the Asset Manager, because right now it's a blob. When I preload, it's actually a blob. It's an object, right? And I want to get the result of what I've preloaded and call that particular element inside of my array, and that's the one that I want in here, not some other random one. And I got to do something like this, where I pass in the name of my image name. So that's the new syntax. So basically what I'm saying is, hey, use the Asset Manager to get the result of whatever matches the image name, right? And the result will be that blob that I'm loading. I'm preloading. So I'm using Ajax to preload that image into memory, and I'm passing that image down into my bitmap, right? Now I shouldn't have a problem doing this because it's already preloaded, right? So before I even get to building a button, I've already preloaded it. I know I've loaded it ahead of time, so I know it's going to work. Okay, I think I know. Let's see if I can make sure I know. How do I test this out? Well, everything is almost the exact same, right? So I've gotten this part done. And this is almost the exact same. I just have to pass in the Asset Manager, which I don't like right now, right? But it's a middle step. And I know this is going to work. If it comes to here, that means this is already triggered. So therefore, if everything works well, I should be able to go back to the web, which is somewhere over here, and see a button, which I do. Hey man, what the heck? What? Why is this button over on top of this thing? How come? Nope. Well, it's not changed, but what is it? Tell me. It's rendering after, which means it layers in render order. Okay? So that means that because I added the hello world object before the button, the hello world object will be underneath the button. Okay? Because CreateJS works in something called a display list. It's just an array of objects that it's loading into the display list. The stage is just one big list, a display list, a list of objects. And what is happening is it loads the array or the list one item at a time. It pops or pushes into the array. Push, 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 push. And as the thing pushes in the array, it's going to display or render all the objects in the array in array order, in element order. All right? Which means that this is always going to be underneath this. Notice how the button is working though, right? The button, this click me button, is if I hover over it, that works. So that's the class that's triggering. I'm not getting any errors anymore on the console, right? Because I've preloaded my button. So it's loading, it's fetching with Ajax the button before or even after. It's asynchronously loading the button, even after the web page loads. Who cares, right? All right, this is neat. Let's separate a little bit. Let's stop the rotation. Okay, so we're going to go back to game.ts, and I'm going to go in here, and let's just stop the rotation. We don't want the button rotating anymore. So we're going to rotate, stop the rotation, and I want to create my final thing for the button. So when I click on the button, my button doesn't click yet. I want to change hello world to goodbye cruel world. All right, let's try that. All right. So down here, I've already defined my button. I'm going to add this new event handler. So I'm going to say click button dot on click. On click, do what? Right? Well, I can do two things. I can write an inline function, anonymous self-executing function right here, and do my button function right here. I could do it that way. That's the JavaScript way, right? Or I could declare a named function. For now, because this is only going to ever trigger, I'm never going to call this function with any other button. I might as well do it an anonymous function that's sitting inside of my event handler. So my event handler and my event listener are kind of written in one line. This is the JavaScript way. So what do I want this thing to do? I want to say that the click button dot text value, right? That's what I want to change, right? The text value of the click button. But remember, the click button itself is a bitmap, right? That's what I want to do, right? Actually, I really want to change the hello label. Hello label dot text value. The text value of the hello label is equal to goodbye cruel world, right? Something really long. And I want to do this for a reason too. Goodbye cruel world. Okay, save. So now it shouldn't rotate, right? Not rotating anymore. I have a button that I can hover over, right? As I hover over, this functionality works. And when I click me, it should change this to goodbye cruel world. Let's see. Oh man, what the heck? How come it did this? Why did it do that? Why did it do that? I didn't update the rect. In other words, I didn't update the registration mark, right? How do I update the registration mark? Whenever I change or set the text object, I need a getter, right? And when the getter triggers, it updates the registration mark, right? I don't have a getter. I don't have any properties for my label, right? I need to extend the label by adding a getter. Now, in C# or Java, no problem. But what the heck? How do I do that in JavaScript? There is no way, really. But it does handle it in TypeScript. And this is the beautiful thing about TypeScript. So if I want to look and do a getter in TypeScript, if I go to documentation, right? And if I want to search for getters and setters, if I look for handbook, this is all up online, by the way. If you want to learn TypeScript, the best manual is on typescriptlang.org. All right? And if I go to variable declarations, right? You can see that you can use var and you can use let, right? But what I really want is not variable declaration, but rather classes. Classes allow things like it shows you how you do your class, right? And I can also use not only inheritance like this, but also getters and setters, right? So if you scroll down here, you'll see some examples of getters and setters, right? So where is it? Rate only modifier. Oh yeah, that's the one. Did I pass it? I may have passed it already. Nope. Accessors. Here it is. Look. Here's the syntax, right here. Get, set. Okay, question. I'm using I'm using the setter to change it. I need the getter. The getter actually creates the way I can get information. I want to get the text. And the setter actually allows me to create a setter. So before I set the text value, right, I'm not going to use text. I'm going to use SetText, right, or text, capital T, in my new version of my file, right? Text or whatever you want to call it, right? So this is full name. So I used to use the get and set keywords plus basically in front of what looks like a method. That's what it is, right? Okay. I got my syntax. Let's do it. So inside my label, and this is the last thing we'll do, and then we'll say goodbye, right? So bear with me while we do this. I need a getter and setter. It should probably sit up here in my public properties. So let's do this. So I'm going to say, well then, I want to get, notice also that I don't have to do the public keyword because all properties are public, right? In this case, my keyword that I want to use, like some kind of thing that describes the text property of the label, right? So get text string, we'll call it text string, just to make it easy. My text string, so it's different than text, lowercase, right? And it is a method, right? So get text string, if you notice, I don't need to pass anything in there. What does it return? It returns a string, so that's the return type. And in order for me to do that, I need to return, right, this dot text. Does that make sense? Because text is actually a value, a property that belongs to the text object, right? So that's my getter. Let's do the setter. Set, right, text string. Has to be the same name, right? And I need to send in a value to set. So some kind of new text, which is a string, right? And this, I've got to set it. So I'm going to say this dot text is equal to, right, text. That will be equivalent to the setter. But see how this works? However, before I do this, right, or even after I do this, I need to change the registration values of my new text, my object. So I'm going to say something like this. Well, I want to do kind of this, right? I can copy this for now, but maybe what we want to do is set up some other way of doing this in a method that I can call. For now, let's just do this. So I want to kind of come up back here, up here, and just do one of these. So now I reset the measured width and height with my text object, right? Okay, let's see if that fixes it. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Okay, so I've saved it. It's transpiled. I want to go over here, right? Hello world still centered, right? I've done my due diligence. Let's see if it works. And click. Oh. Right? How come it didn't work? Huh? That's right. Let's fix it. So back down into my label, into my game.ts. Instead of doing this, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to specify that I need to do, I'm going to call it, what do I call it? Text string. Text string. And I don't want to say equals. That's not the way you do it, I don't think. I believe you have to pass it in. Yeah, I think so. Let's see the implementation online. Hold on. I believe that's what you do. Nope. No, that's right. I'm right. Like this. All right, let's try it again. Sorry. Make sense? So now that's why we use getters and setters. Sometimes I can't teach this even in a C# class because you're like, why do I even create getters and setters? Who cares? Why would I make properties? Because inside the getter or the setter, it allows me to do something else. It's a method. So it gives me the opportunity to do something else. And we're going to use the same kind of logic when we use the scoreboard, right? The scoreboard class, when I set the scoreboard, it can update other things, not just the scoreboard itself. Once I set that scoreboard, it does other stuff. It can save, it can do other things. It can set a bunch of different things. All right, questions around today. This is a big one. Yes.
For example, the text property is still available, right? Is there a way so we can
Block it?
Yeah.
Not really, because remember it's JavaScript, right? So if I override the text property and do something else weird like that, then there isn't really a way. Not with CreateJS. If I made my own class, then yeah, I would do this way, right? I would make it so it's but no, there isn't, because I'm inheriting from a class that's already public. I can't unpublic the public, property. It's like a public property that I'm not using anymore. Because remember, CreateJS was written before TypeScript, so it's. I would love to say yes to you, and if I made it, if someone had that in mind, then yes, I could do it. But I can't override something that's public. It won't allow me, right? Because the other stuff would come through. Now I could try and hide, because C# can hide by making another implementation of the text property, but then I would have trouble inside my own class doing it. Then how would I do it, right? See what I'm saying? So it'd have to be some kind of private way of doing it, and there's no other way. So we have to know that when we update our object, we have to do this, text string, right? Does that make sense? Any other questions around this? I know this is a lot today, but it's really not. Let me put this up on GitHub. So I'm going to say, I'll say fixed bug in button and label classes. It's one's related to the other. Cancel. That's what I did here. There's a bunch of changes. Right? And I'll push. And you should have everything that I did on GitHub now. Okay, so why do we do buttons and labels today? Because they're the building blocks of user interfaces, right? When we have buttons and labels, I can build a calculator like these fine folks are doing over here, right? But I can do it, I can put any user interface item on the screen, like a score, like a start button, like some kind of movement, or whatever I want to do, right? This is the basis of all user interfaces, and you need to know user interfaces before you move forward to anything else. Next week, what we'll do is we'll build a finite state machine that allows us to go from one screen to the next, right? Which means we'll build a new scene class, right? The scene class will be an extension of the stage, right? So I'll extend a container, a new container, which I'll pass into the stage. And basically what I can do is I can wipe that container out and reinstantiate it with a new container with all the new stuff. That's what I'll be doing, right? So I can have multiple screens. That's what it's going to be like, right? Depending on when the user selection. So the one I want to build next is I want to use my buttons to create a start, a play screen, and then a game over screen. That structure for you, and give you that. Because with that structure in mind, you can build as many levels as you want, right? So imagine if you were doing Unity, you would already have that structure. I wouldn't have to do any of this stuff. In fact, all this stuff I'm doing right now, I wouldn't have to do. All right, any other questions? So we've learned TypeScript, just to recap, a little bit more TypeScript today. We learned a new structure in CreateJS called the bitmap. We've also talked about preloading. We've already implemented our preloader, which is awesome, which means now we can preload sounds and images of all kinds. And even when we move our bitmap and we change it into a sprite, if we ever do, we can change our loader to load sprites as well as bitmaps. So it'll load sprites, and the difference between a sprite and a bitmap is a sprite can be animated and a bitmap cannot, okay, in CreateJS. Okay, no other questions? Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Please remember that next week is our pitch. As soon as you come in next week, we'll do our pitch. It'll be 7 minutes per group max. With some feedback, we should be done within the first hour. We don't have that many groups to do. All right, and the remaining 2 hours we'll be using to do this. Okay, I'll see you next week, and I'll come to you in a sec.